Welcome to our podcast, Where Do We Go? Where we bring in guests to have conversations with high schoolers that are both relatable and informative regarding the idea of female leadership. I'm Kylie, and I'm the founder of the organization and club, WeGo, and I'm so glad that you decided to listen to our podcast today. WeGo stands for Women Empowerment and Global Opportunity, and our mission is to cultivate the skill set students will need in order to foster a new generation of strong leaders that will make changes in the field that they want to take on. Because the stage is set for girls and women everywhere. We go.
Welcome to the 5th episode of our podcast, Where Do We Go? My name is Kylie, and I'm the founder of WeGo. And today, I am joined by Miss Jade Fernandez, and I'll let her formally introduce herself in a moment, but she is an engineer and a product designer at Apple, a Punahou alum, and a Stanford graduate. And she's actually one of my teachers for a class I'm taking, the GSD product design class, which we will probably talk about later, but that's kind of how I was able to set this whole thing up. So yeah, I'll let her introduce herself now and a little bit more about what she does and maybe some insight on her. So
thank you. That was a very realistic introduction. But yeah, so I was a Punahou grad, class of 2010, so 10 years ago. And since graduating from Punahou, I went to Stanford and did my bachelor's degree in product design engineering. And that's where I was sort of introduced to design thinking and a lot of things that we're doing in the GSD class, like laser cutting, 3D printing. I had never done that in high school, so it's super awesome that you guys are able to do that at Punahou as a freshman going into academy. So that's super awesome to see sort of like that development and adaptation to engineering. And that's where I got introduced to machineries and different types of prototyping methods. And that got me really excited and wanting to go deeper. And so then I continued on my education in mechanical engineering for my master's. And that's where I went super deep in design and manufacturing and really kind of found my niche of what I like to do. And since Stanford, I have been at Apple working as a product design engineer, specifically on the packaging team. So the little white boxes that your phone comes in is what my team is responsible for designing and producing. And this year has been a very special and weird year, I'm sure for many people. But we are work from home, which has allowed me to come back to Hawaii and get involved in the community. I think something that was really important to me that I found kind of missing in my high school time was not the lack of engineering classes, but kind of just there was not even any awareness. I didn't even know what engineering was going into college. And that felt like a little bit of a setback because so many of my classmates already knew what engineering was. And meanwhile, I was like, do I want to study art? Do I want to study architecture? So it was just this whole field that I felt was missing. And I wanted to be able to spend a little bit of time giving back to the community and trying to see how I could get involved in Punahou and what they're trying to do with engineering classes, which has been very impressive so far from what I've seen. So it's been really cool to see.
So then so this is kind of like a question that we always ask our guests here. And, we're always curious about like, who are some of the women in your life that you kind of admire?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a lot. I think just on a more personal and less like iconic women level. So I report to a woman who reports to a woman who reports to a woman who reports to Tim Cook, which is pretty cool. My whole line is all female and then Tim Cook, which is very, I think, rare at a lot of, I guess I won't say companies. It's rare at Apple for sure to have that kind of lineage. And so I feel really lucky in that I have these three women in my life and in my career trajectory to kind of not only support me, but also advocate for me. I think we can relate on a certain level when we are, the youngest in the room, the only female in the room, the only person of color in the room. And that's just really helpful to have that sort of support network. And so I guess it's hard without personally knowing them, but kind of just having people in your corner, I feel like, and I feel that my manager's manager, and then even my VP are all women that I look up to, because I see how they carry themselves in meetings, and that is something that I kind of like strive to embody, that same confidence. I think in a more like iconic setting, I would say just very relevant, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg is one of my favorite people. I think she's just fought for so many rights for women that we don't even know that exist. Like recently, I had bought my first house, and I didn't realize she passed the law that allows single women to buy houses. Like, if she didn't do that, I would have had to need a male cosigner, which is a crazy thing to think of in this day and age, that like women need cosigners for like big financial loans. So that was something that just like personally reminded me of like all of these women who came before us and fought for things that we just take for granted. We don't even think twice about like needing a male cosigner for anything. So I would say that's probably my like big icon in the global setting of like who people know.
Yeah. Well, so then, because even people who come before us is always important too. I feel like learning from them, and then we get to hear their stories and what they experience, and hopefully because of them we're able to kind of create our own legacy as well.
It's sort of, you get to pick up where they left off, which is super awesome to carry the torch forward.
Yeah, so just like, and also hearing conversations, just having conversations with people like you who, are professionals in their field, then we also get to learn and get some insight, and able to learn from people like you, and also kind of like what we want to do and what we would like to do, and get some inspiration as well. So
totally.
So then also, what was another thing that we really wanted to ask was like, if there's like a certain story of like how you got into the field of like product design and engineering, or if there's like a specific experience or a specific person that possibly inspired you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I got into product design in just like a weird way. I didn't really think that studying art would take me very far, and I didn't really enjoy architecture. I knew I liked art, I knew I liked math. I got introduced to the PD courses at Stanford through a friend, and I was like, sweet, we don't have to buy textbooks, we don't have to take tests. I'm all about it. But I quickly learned that like product design is all about problem solving outside of like a very institutionalized academic setting. And I liked that. I liked thinking about more worldly issues in sort of a classroom setting, and then realizing you can really take that beyond product design. But I will say I feel really grateful. There were many people in my life who played a role in pushing me. I think one person that comes to mind, her name is Allison Yamada. She was a TA while I was in undergrad, and there was a TA program to work in a machine shop, and you had to have been enrolled in the master's program. And I already kind of canceled myself out of it. I was like, I'm not smart enough. My GPA is not good enough. I'm not going to get into the master's program. He approached me in the shop and was like, hey, the TA applications are out. Are you applying? And I was like totally taken aback, super shocked. And I was like, no, I don't have the grades for that. Like, I love being in the shop. I love making things, but obviously, you have to take other classes, and that was really challenging for me. And she was like, oh, well, I didn't have the grades either. It's not just a matter of grades. Like, let me help you go through this process. I'll talk to professors if you need me to. And it was something I really wanted. And I was like, sure, if you're willing to help me out and kind of advocate for me, then why not try?
Yeah.
And it really worked out where I was able to get it. And I truly believe it could not have happened if she didn't identify something in me that I didn't see in myself at that point. And same thing with Apple. Apple was another one of my classmates who knew of the role and was like, you would be awesome for it. And at the time I was like, I don't know if Apple's something, I want to do. I know it's a really intense work environment. I don't know if I'm ready for that. And she's like, you're more than prepared. You need to stop talking yourself out of these things. I will go and like give the director a resume. And now that I'm there, I'm like, oh, obviously this was such a great fit for me. Like I just couldn't see it myself. And so I've learned how important it is to push other people and really build confidence in them, because that was something that I didn't see at the time for me, but other people saw it, and I would not be where I am without them. So
just like imagine, having the ability to kind of see yourself and then, being able to identify what you like to do and like what are your passions, I think is important. And that has been like a prevalent message throughout all of the speakers that we've had, is to kind of like identify what you like to do and then kind of like work
totally.
Yeah,
and I think not let that, when I was in the shop, I was sort of like, oh, I don't know if there's like a job for me that lets me do all of these fun things. But to not let that thinking kind of bring you down, because I think the world is adapting to work more in that way of like product design thinking and kind of like trying to solve real world problems. So it's a very exciting time for women.
Yeah, so then you could, actually, that's a good kind of like transition to another question we might have is, it would be like, it's super fitting right now because you talk about real world problems and we are facing a huge problem right now with the pandemic. So a question is, how has kind of like the effects of the pandemic impacted maybe like the design process at Apple, and if there's like maybe specific features that have been come up with, or maybe like any impact that the pandemic has towards.
Yeah, another really good question. I think Apple, to my experience in this year so far, has not really slowed down. And I think that is a testament to people coming to Apple because they want to do great work and they are committed to the product. I think we've definitely had to learn how to adapt differently. One day we were in the office, the next day we were told to go home. We weren't sure when it was going to end. But we found different ways to work. And I think a big part of it is we have really strong counterparts in China, and they're at the factory and they're able to be on site. So a lot of our day-to-day job has changed. Like I used to be able to go in a lab and prototype and build things and get those samples reviewed by our industrial designers. And now none of that is happening. A lot of it is actually communicating and trying to bring up our China partners as extensions of our team rather than sort of our contractors. And so we've just learned to work differently. We've learned to rely on other people and kind of let go a little bit more, and definitely work on our communication to express what we need from other people and then transfer that back to different teams. So it's just a different style of working. And it definitely has its efficiencies and inefficiencies. So we're working to balance that. But it is nice to be home sometimes, but it's certainly also balance there in terms of like not feeling exhausted from so many WebEx meetings.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like kind of like us and like how we're kind of learning now and adapting to like school and how we're kind of transitioning to like towards online school and then coming back, and then who knows, maybe we'll be back in online school and learning how to do all these WebEx stuff. So
totally. I think I've been coming back into the teaching environment, and I had taught at Stanford a little bit, but high school feels like a totally different ballgame. And I have so much empathy for teachers and students now. I thought Apple was hard sort of transitioning to this, but I think teaching and learning is a lot harder to switch from in person to online. So I think it's just been a big transition year for everybody.
Yeah, it really has. So also you kind of mentioned how because of new technology and just this rapid growth of and just the way that our world is transitioning every day, maybe because of the pandemic, maybe not because of the pandemic, but do you think there are any like what kind of like new job opportunities do you see in the future for like our generation as technology kind of rapidly grows?
Yeah. I think there's so much potential, and I can't even keep up with all of the different design jobs that are opening. I think because people are realizing design isn't just like product design, it isn't just
Right.
like designing an AirPods case. It really is in every aspect of life. Like you could be designing the flow of your room or designing a birthday party.
Right.
It's like experiences that people are realizing have a big impact by design. And so I think I definitely see a future in which more and more engineering jobs are going to open up, and there'll be more and more sort of like cross sections of different things. So not only knowing hardware, but also software and EE and business and supply chain. I think the more versatility you have,
Yeah.
the more impactful and kind of like
Yeah.
powerful you can be in a company to kind of play all of these different roles into shipping a product, because that's what it is at the end of the day, is a company that can do all of these aspects well to get a product out the door. So I feel very excited for your generation. I feel like for me there was way more than I thought there ever was, and so it's just being mindful to not get your mind pigeonholed and like, well, there's only like these three fields that I'm interested in going, and there's just so much more out there. And I think companies are becoming a lot more cooler because they have all these positions.
Yeah, so I think, just now you kind of mentioned how if we were able to kind of get experience in different types of areas, then that would make us like an even more like powerful kind of like employee or person work of work. So then what how can girls our age prepare for like those like leadership roles in the future?
Yeah. So I never did an internship in high school. I only started doing internships in college.
Mhm.
But I think internships were a great way for me to start evaluating what I liked
Right.
in certain works and never doing the same internship twice. So, if I did an internship with one company and maybe I loved it and enjoyed it, I wouldn't go back for another internship, because I think that's your chance to taste a little bit of
Right.
all of the different things you could do. So I did internships in engineering and design and business development, and that sort of helped me evaluate um, like which field I wanted to go deeper in. And it also helps, I think it helped me develop a sense of like what role business plays in design or what role engineering plays in design and vice versa.
Mhm.
So it was a way to get sort of, you can strategize it in a way to get a holistic view of a company. But I think and if you have friends, family who run small businesses, I think that's great insight to see like how much it takes to actually
Yeah.
ship a product. But I think you guys are learning all the right skills now. And if there's something that you particularly like, maybe it's the sketching portion or CAD or prototyping or coming up with the business structure. Those are really great things to kind of guide you in the right direction so that you don't feel like it's binary. It's not one job or the other. So that's probably my advice. Maybe not, I don't know if people even do internships in high school, but maybe when you get to college, thinking about that as a way to structure your different internships.
Right. And I think hopefully that's people who listen to our podcast can also take away too, because we try to interview people of different fields, so hopefully they also get kind of this exposure to what are the different fields out there. So that's another way that we kind of hopefully are able to impact our listeners and all the members at
Yeah, totally.
yeah, and so hopefully they'll be able to get a sense of what they might enjoy doing, what they probably won't enjoy doing, and just getting a sense of that is, I think, really important for girls our age. So
Yes.
yeah.
And it's a lot easier to figure it out in the 10 weeks at an internship than a job that has no end date.
Right. Yeah. So then, you kind of help teach the product design, global sustainability by design course. and it kind of surrounds the whole idea of, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think one in particular that kind of blends well with like our mission of WeGo is, the fifth goal, which is gender inequality. So as a teacher of the GSD course, what do you think are ways that we can kind of solve this issue by that like deadline of 2030?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it comes down to education, which is what Punahou is doing. And I think GSD is pretty 50-50. I could be wrong. I could be quoting that wrong, but I think it's pretty close. And I think it's that. I think it's awareness and exposure. I think girls and boys are raised differently in a lot of cases, and that can put a certain gender at a disadvantage based on the way they're raised. Like, I don't think girls, at least my generation, we weren't given, screwdrivers unless your dad worked on his car at home, and we weren't given certain things that I think maybe tended to fall as toys for the boys, which is totally fine. But then when you have someone like me who's interested in making things, because I like to be hands-on, and I don't know what a screwdriver is going into a machining class, I think you're ultimately at a disadvantage, and you can get totally discouraged like I was. And so having the awareness and the opportunity early on and getting that like fundamental education, I think is huge in getting people excited about different fields. And it's not only women, I think men too, they're raised differently, and they might have interests in things that they weren't given as children, and might be an inequality there. And so personally, my own philosophy is like, we should be raising girls and boys the same, and giving them all equal opportunities. So I am really excited for what Punahou is doing and what they're trying to do. I know even at the kindergarten level, they're trying to get exposure. And I think that is just really helpful in getting people excited about engineering. And it's really awesome to see.
Yeah, and there's already that kind of like internalized stereotypes that I think everyone has also about like what girls like would do and what boys would do. And I think if we kind of get out of that habit of always, listening to those prejudices and stereotypes when going into certain passions and certain fields, I think will open doors for a lot more women to go into the field that they actually want to pursue. So I think
Totally.
And
yeah,
I think
go ahead.
Oh, no. So yeah, you can go ahead. I'll just
Okay. Yeah, and I was just gonna say that, like, oftentimes you see robotics clubs and engineering clubs, and they're all boys or men, and they're kind of all a certain type of personality. So it's important to like find women who are interested in the same things as you are, and kind of create that tribe and create that sort of safety area. Because I think there just has been a way that things have been done, and people continue to buy into that. But it's definitely changing. So being able to find like your people and other women who are like you, I think is really important in keeping you motivated.
Yeah. Also, kind of like a plug for WeGo too is also hopefully through our club we can also, girls can find people who are interested in the same things as them. So
yeah,
100%. So kind of a shameless plug. And so I think this was actually a question that was sent in by Kat, and she's a freshman at Punahou. And this kind of goes in hand with what you were talking about earlier with like discouragement of going into like a male-dominated field. So her question was, as a woman in this field of work that is most commonly dominated by men, do you ever feel that you have to work harder than your male counterparts? And if so, what gives you the drive to do so?
I feel that all the time. I feel like I go into the office and all the boys are just like playing on their video games, talking about video games. I don't know what they do. And I'm like, how do you get your work done? But for me, I don't really view it as competition. I'm not, I never say like, oh, I need to work harder than this person to get ahead.
Yeah.
I would say it helps to have a female manager and a female director and a female VP, because I think they're really quick to recognize good work when it's being done. But certainly there is an element of like, I need to prove myself so that they don't think of me a certain way. But I think once you build that trust, it's really easy for them to not make assumptions about you. And so it's not really about like sustaining a high workload. It's sort of like proving yourself early so that people then trust your decision making after. And then letting your male colleagues do what they need to do to build that trust, whether that looks really differently or not. So I think just trying to, and it might be totally different in what business you're at, who your manager is. But yeah, it's definitely hard to not feel that way, and it's hard to say if they feel that way. So I think just kind of staying in my lane and focusing on my goals, I think, has been good in terms of not getting distracted by other things.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes for other male-dominated fields as well, especially for women into that field, just to kind of, although sometimes hard to kind of like not focus so much on other people's assumptions and, focusing on yourself and really like having that like tunnel vision of your workload and being able to kind of recognize that kind of that prejudice is always going to follow you wherever you go and lie in the back of your mind, which is something that is hard to kind of deal with. Even like one of my experiences at Puno was like I remember specifically, I think I took like an engineering type elective when I was in 7th grade or 6th grade, and I ended up being the only girl there. And so with like 20 other boys in that elective, and it was a good experience because I kind of had like a little like I got to dip my toes in the water of like what females must feel like in that field. Maybe not all females, but some females may feel like in that kind of engineering male dominated field. So
yeah, and I am often the only woman in a meeting or a call. I'm often like the youngest, the only person of color. And I will say it feels really good now because I've been there for so long, and I walk into meetings and I know I'm gonna like own that meeting, and people fully respect me. And so it feels really good once people acknowledge that. And then you don't have that prejudice anymore. I walk into meetings and I'm like, it's gonna be a great meeting. I'm gonna lead it, I'm gonna make the decisions. People are gonna respect my calls. And I think that confidence also kind of helps them get on board with that sort of line of thought. And so I would say like after your first year, that prejudice kind of goes away and you're like, I'm a boss for being able to do this.
I think confidence is definitely something that helps. Just having that mindset before going into it is definitely important. But
and then they make it look easy because they all just like slack off and play their video games, and then so.
Yeah, and so actually, this is kind of like going back to the whole like problem solving and the whole idea of being an engineer. And I remember reading about one of your like projects as a like mechanical engineer where you like created things to help like a crab farmer in like the Philippines.
Yep.
So I actually found it really interesting because you were able to helping for that single individual, you had like you're able to kind of impact a whole community and expand like that job opportunity, and that was like the mission. So maybe if you could like talk about your experience there and also like the impact of like innovation and creating products for people.
So that was from a course that I took in my master's program. It was designed for extreme affordability, very similar to GSD, I think, in a lot of ways. But it was cool because it had a financial constraint. I think if you think about companies like Apple, they have so much money, so many resources. But I kind of wanted to be pushed and flexed in a way where you didn't have all of that, and you were kind of helping people sort of who didn't have those types of resources. And I think that actually makes for a lot of really interesting design. But that was just a really great experience for me to do, honestly, a ton of research in crab farming and what that meant and what that whole ecosystem looked like, and distribution system. And so it was a great research opportunity. We got to travel to the Philippines and do prototypes on site and work with us, specific individuals who are farming to see how their lives can improve. And I think that is like the whole ethos of design is, what are you doing to improve someone's life? And I think it was just small things that we made design connections with that we thought that they could improve on. And it was just really cool to like get out there and prototype and for them to get really excited about ideas. And it wasn't like us saying, we know better, this is how you should be doing it, but us working together to say like, is this a good design direction that, could help your business? And then kind of giving us their feedback and us going back and working. And so it's this really cool feedback loop. I have to confess, I don't know where they're at today and if they're even using our devices, but I think that exposure was good for them too, in terms of us, kind of sharing our design process and design thinking so that they are now empowered to go and solve their own problems as well.
And I think speaking to, people like engineers, a lot of people have that like connotation that it's mainly like math and science, and those types of fields. But learning, even going through this GSD class and the whole design process, it actually it requires a lot of like reading and writing as well, because there's so much, you have to empathize with the client and you have to learn more about their issue and the whole like their needs, and having to learn more and research. So I think that's also a side of engineering and like product design that isn't much talked about, I feel like, because the face of it is creating it and designing something and putting it out there.
Yeah, totally. There are jobs where you were just doing like cultural research and informing a mechanical engineer to go design things. So it can be a completely extensive process. I took anthropology and psychology classes in college to help better inform me as a designer. So like really being able to study a group of people, because I think it's really hard to need find if you don't know anything about them or you don't know how to properly research them. Psychology, I think, was another great one to help better facilitate interviews and help kind of understand how the mind works as it relates to design, because I think there's a huge aspect of that, and Apple has definitely taken over kind of understanding the psychology of the mind and then applying it to design and what makes something intuitive, what makes you gravitate towards a design over another thing. So I think definitely not thinking about it in very like black and white terms, I think is a very powerful thing, because it opens up studies of other fields in ways that people didn't think about before. I just showed a biomimicry video in my Engineering 1 class, and they were so surprised at how much biologists can inform design and the study of animals influencing how things are made and how things function. So it really is, design touches every field.
And even like going into the GSD class, I was like, how is product design and the social studies aspect gonna like tie in hand in hand? I was like, going into it, I was a little skeptical because I was like, social studies and product design, and I didn't know how those two were gonna fit together. But going into the class now and being in it, it's like there's so many connections that you can make, and even just looking at the UN goals and with product design, there's so much that can overlap. And that was like one of the questions we were going to ask was how engineering kind of might intertwine with like other fields. And I think kind of like,
I think I definitely touched on it earlier, but I think, I don't know. I think design is kind of endless and it can inform so much. I give guest lectures for my friend's class, and it's a law class, nothing to do with design, but we talk about sort of even how to, you can kind of really think of like Congress as the law designers. They're the ones making up the laws and then publishing the laws, and they're designing it. We talk a lot about like how technology can be used in a field of law, how it can help a consumer, help a customer. So yeah, I feel like design just really touches every facet of anything that people do. And it really is, if you take away anything, if you distill it all down, it's really about how can you improve other people's lives or your lives or just, life in general. Like, how can you make it better? And that is inherently design, at least to me. And so if you can have that mindset, no matter what job you're doing, you can always find room for improvement. And so that would be kind of my takeaway for, whatever field you want to study, there's things that can be better designed for sure. So being able to identify it, I think, is really important, and then problem solve from there.
And I think that's also something really cool, just even speaking to, designers like you, there's so much that you can learn from designers and just like the design process in general, and it can be applied to not only like when we go up to like the workplace and have our own like jobs, but even in like right now when we're in school, there's so much things that we can utilize the design process for. Whether it's doing homework or even like ways to kind of study better or ways to utilize our laptops better. I think that even just going through the design process and knowing how we can use design in our everyday lives is something that's really cool and important, and a lot of people don't think about it that way. So
especially this year, there's a
Yeah.
lot that can be improved with the COVID situation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But also with the whole like we were talking about like the rapid growth and how having to kind of like adapt using what I just mentioned, the design process. What do you see, and also like what do you hope to see the future of design, like product design engineering for women in the future? Like what do you see in like the next down the
Yeah,
road?
yeah. I guess for the woman specific part, I'll answer that first.
Mhm.
Just more of it, more women getting into engineering. I think there definitely is greater power in diversity of thought, and that just comes with people of different backgrounds. I think, I don't know, my experience with women versus that, I think women are awesome and they should definitely be in places of power, in my unbiased opinion. But yeah, so I think that would be my answer for like, how I see the future for women in engineering. For how I see the future of product design, I think, and it relates to climate change and a lot of what's going on in this world. I really hope that we all kind of take the stance of thinking about the end of life and sort of that closing of the loop in terms of like, what are the consequences that we're not thinking about when it comes to what we put out in this world, or what the supply chain looks like, or the manufacturing process. Because I think we're sort of in a place where we are making, trashing, and it's a really destructive process. And so I would love to see this generation, all of the generations to follow, to really critically think about like, what am I putting out into this world, and does the positives outweigh the negatives? And if not, how I can adjust to make my business more sustainable, to make my processes more sustainable. Because I think that is sort of what we're losing sight of, and what is kind of running too far out of our hands. So really reining that back in, I think, is not an easy task. But I'm hoping to get a lot more of thought into it, and having really strong critical thinkers kind of apply their knowledge to it, and maybe it's not the huge profit we make at the end of the day, but creating something that is more sustainable and has a more long-term lifespan, I think, is really important to focus on in the space of engineering.
Yeah, and we were talking to, previous speakers, and they always kind of bring their insight on, what they hope to see women doing in their specific field. And, I think what's really interesting, hearing all these speakers talk about their field and what they hope to see and what they do see in like the next 10 or 20 years, it's really interesting because they all believe that, or they want to have more women in their field, and all for the same reason, to provide more perspective and to bring new ideas to the table. Because I think women definitely bring a different perspective. They are the ones that, are, carry babies, and they're the ones that have to go through that process. And, not only that, but, we just have the people come with different perspectives and they bring different things to the table, whether it's their strength.
Totally. And, the world is 50% women, 50% men. You can't just have a room of men designing for the world, because that's not going to work for half of the population. So it really, like you said, like women have very unique experiences, and they need to be part of that design process.
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting to see how, although we had different speakers from different fields, they all have these like the same goals that they hope to achieve in their specific field. So that's definitely something to take note of, especially when hearing these conversations.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll get more women encouraged, girls encouraged to go into these fields.
Okay, so I guess now we can kind of move towards the like student submitted questions. These are questions that have been submitted by some of our members. So the first student submitted question is from Alyssa, and she is a junior, and she kind of wants to know what courses were the most helpful at Punahou to get you to where you are today.
That's a tough question, mostly because I have a terrible memory of what happened 10 years ago.
Or maybe specific really experiences of like
I think one class that I think is I keep coming back to that I didn't think I would was public speaking. I think like what you're doing now is super awesome. Running a podcast is no easy feat, and you are a very eloquent speaker. I will say I was not that way. I hated raising my hand in class. I could hardly remember what I even said after I said it. And unfortunately, life is just not structured like that. You just have to learn to speak more and more in public. And so taking those classes that kind of push you to be a good communicator, I think is really important, because at the end of the day, that's how you express ideas. That's how you express even design. And so refining that skill, I think, is super important. And I wish I had learned that earlier in high school, because it would have made college easier. It would have made my first presentations and big exec reviews easier. But I mean, you'll naturally get there anyway if you continue to put yourself in those positions. But yeah, I would say like the technical classes that everyone's like, you need to be good at math to go into engineering. I was not good at math. I liked it, but I wasn't the best at it. I took a ton of art classes. I think really like nurturing what you're interested in is really important too. But from a tactical standpoint, I think public speaking was a big one.
And do you think, even though with all like the technological growth, do you think those like communication skills will still be applicable in like the coming years?
100%. Yes. I think a lot of, especially being in the working world, a lot of my job is convincing people why this is the right thing to do for a design, for a decision. And it's really hard to convince someone if you can't communicate well. The data can only do so much for you, but I've found that if you are an effective communicator, then you, in a way, become a leader, because people look to you to help state the problem, state the decision in a way that is like quick to grasp. And so I think, even if it's uncomfortable, like forcing yourself to speak up early and often is really, really key in development.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And then I think, so this question is from Chloe. She's a sophomore, and she wants to know, what is the most fulfilling part of your job?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I guess not that tough. I love making products. I love shipping things, but I think the most fulfilling thing is my team. I think you don't spend more time with anyone else in this world than your team and who you work with. You see them more than you see your husband or your partner. And so working with really good people, I think, is what keeps me coming back every day. And I think that is really important. And the work is fun and great and awesome, and maybe motivates a lot of people to stay at Apple. But I think working with people who want to do well and work hard and are aligned to that goal, I think has been the most fulfilling for me.
Yeah, and I think even for me as a student, definitely like the people that we encounter at school, whether it be the teachers or just the students, definitely make a big part of
Mm-hmm.
our experience. And I think, yeah, definitely people and they definitely keep us motivated, especially when it comes to working and it comes to, things like design.
Yeah, I think even in college, I remember in high school too, chemistry had a great teacher and we all took it because the teacher was really good. And yeah, and it's almost like it doesn't matter what the content is. If
Yeah,
you have good people, it's going to be fun, it's going to be
right.
interesting, and you're going to enjoy it. So,
Yeah, although it's hard if like the course is fun and the teacher is good and the people that you have definitely impact whether or not it kind of just outweighs everything if you enjoy it, no matter how
totally.
difficult it is. Yeah. And I guess the last question, this kind of is one that is a big question, but I think is a good place to kind of end with, is like, what have you done to kind of overcome difficult design obstacles?
Hmm. Difficult design obstacles. I think I think it goes back to kind of having like your tribe of people. I
Mm-hmm.
think going and talking to other people is key in the design process. I don't think you can ever do it yourself start to finish. I think you will always have a team, you'll always have people kind of inputting their advice, but having people that you really trust and can go to with problems, I think is super key in not feeling stuck and helpless. And so identifying those people early and keeping them in your life is super important. Allison Yamada from college and Christine Tom, who helped me with the Apple job, are still in my life because I've sort of identified them as really strong female leads. And I want to keep going and following in their footsteps. And even if it's not exactly what they're doing, I will always go to them if I have a problem. And, I know I can rely on them and I know that they will give me trustworthy advice that has my best interest. And so I think just forming those relationships and keeping them close, I think are really important. And not only design obstacles, but like life
Right.
obstacles.
And
So,
so, what are ways you think that like girls our age can start to build that network, whether at school
yeah,
or
that's a really good question. I think getting involved in what you're interested in, and then if you find those people, um, letting them know. I think that's one thing that people are always like really shy, like, oh, should I approach this person? Or even like, should I even say thank you for that thing that they did? And like, nobody's ever gonna be mad that you told them thank you or that you say, I really appreciate this thing that you did for me. And I think doing those like really small gestures, even though they can kind of feel weird at the time,
Mhm.
people will remember that and then they'll see something in you that they probably saw in themselves. Um, and so acknowledging things that they do that you really appreciate. And then even just approaching them being like, I am looking for a mentor or I am looking for some help in this. And you seem like such a great person. I would love to stay in contact and you should have that common interest if you're following what you love to do and you happen to meet them along the way. So it's kind of like collecting gems.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also what's really important for women to understand and, just girls to understand is that they can't, they're not alone. And, women all
Mm-hmm.
across the world feel the same way. And there's not a woman that doesn't experience discrimination or inequality when it comes
Yeah.
down to it. And also another important thing is that, um, it doesn't have to be like a men against women kind of thing, boys against girls. And it actually, the thing that that a lot of girls might overlook is that boys actually make a big part of being able for us to succeed in this world, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to kind of also have them on our side is also really important. And it's not just kind of like a women movement, but it's kind of like more of like a collective movement in order for
Everyone. It's
yeah,
everyone.
Yeah.
Because, boy, they have their own problems too. They're discriminated in different
Right.
ways. So it's kind of like, how do we just like bring everyone to the same
Right.
level?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people want that, and it's just about figuring out how to move that needle.
Yeah, like collective growth and, collective movement towards like an equal space for everyone. I think it's
Mhm.
really important, yeah, to understand.
Yeah. So even finding, the men in your life, the boys in your life, um, who are willing to back you up. I think
Mhm.
I have friends who are not very outspoken and get spoken over in lots of meetings, and all you need is, that one guy to say, actually, like Sarah has something to say, like let's pause and give her the floor. And I think that is really powerful to be examples to other people.
Yeah. So, well, I think that's kind of a good place to end and kind of like a good call to action for girls and boys who listen to our podcast. So I think that's kind of a good place to end the podcast for
Sounds
today.
good.
But thank you so much for making time for us and coming to talk to us and giving us a bunch of great and inspirational advice and insight for that will help us a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing this. This is super awesome. I wish this was around when I was younger. So thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And also, if you could, maybe let our listeners know where they can find you or where they can reach you at if they ever need to.
Sure. What is the best way to do that? Should I just
Oh,
drop it in?
oh no, you can actually just mention it, maybe where they can find you, where they can learn more about you right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So I guess I have a really weird schedule, but I am teaching GSD at the COSASA lab, usually there from 12:30 to 2:30 every day. But it's probably best to email me if you're interested. And I'll actually give you guys my personal email address because I check that one more.
Mhm.
So that is 808.jade, Jade, Fernandez, Fernandez, @gmail.com. So just shoot me a note there. Happy to like set up more time if you guys want to talk, or if you just want to drop by the COSASA lab and see what's going on there. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get some girls to reach out to you if they ever need anything or if they're ever interested in talking to you more. So,
Sounds good.
so thank you.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
And I'll see you in class tomorrow.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning into our podcast, Where Do We Go? We hope that our guests inspired you as much as we were. Make sure to check out our website for more information about our organization, WeGo, as well as our Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. We hope you have a great rest of your day and continue to lead and create positive change. This is Kylie, signing off. We'll see you next time.